Bitcoin has already won. It survived government bans. It survived internal wars. It survived being declared dead hundreds of times. Today, it's widely accepted as digital gold. So here's an uncomfortable question. Is it even worth it for Bitcoin to try to be anything else? Or is experimentation a distraction? We'll answer this question by going back to Bitcoin's roots. Bitcoin is conservative by design. Unlike multiple upgrades on Ethereum and Solana, Bitcoin has had minimal changes to its code base, and each one has taken massive amounts of coordination and community consensus. Bitcoiners famously have an obsession with security and view the ossification of the protocol as a feature.
I think, Cami, that for them, unpredictability equals risk, and if you've built something that is so impressive, this amazing machine, why mess with it? All you need to do is oil it, not to change it.
And what would change actually look like?
Change would be change to lines of code. That's what you would need to unlock more functionality. And to a lot of people in the Bitcoin community, that sounds scary. When we actually zoom out and think of, even the systems that keep us alive, air traffic control programming, for example, code is changed and updated and improved there, and we don't get nervous about going on a plane.
Satoshi Nakamoto, in his famous white paper, envisioned Bitcoin as peer-to-peer cash, and so-called Bitcoin maximalists have vowed to keep Bitcoin as close to the original vision as possible. But another Bitcoin obsession that's maybe less talked about is experimentation. Developers have been building on top of the Bitcoin network, trying to expand on the cryptocurrency's use cases since the very early days of the blockchain, driven by the premise that Bitcoin should not only be money, but should also be the foundation for the new financial system. Bitcoiners have been tinkering to make that happen since as early as 2012, and then came Ethereum, driving a lot of that creative energy away from Bitcoin. Let's imagine a world where it's only Bitcoin, a world where Vitalik never had the idea of building Ethereum, and all of the energy and innovation, activity and excitement happened on Bitcoin.
I think there is a fantasy among many Bitcoin people that all of the energy that you see in crypto today would have all been channeled into Bitcoin. But in reality, I'm not sure that's the case, because there wouldn't have been so much to talk about, so much to do, so much to debate.
But here's the thing, we don't have to imagine that world, because briefly we lived in it. Even if Bitcoin wasn't built to be programmable, developers did what developers always do. They pushed the system until it bent. Colored coins were the first breakthrough, developed by a group of hackers including Manny Rosenfeld and eToro's Yoni Assia. They treated individual Satoshis as representations of other assets, like shares and coupons. Think of it as the very earliest attempt at real-world assets. It was the first time Bitcoin was used for more than money.
When I started using Bitcoin, it was the same feeling when, I started using the internet, and when I made my first trades in the stock market, I feel this is a technology that can connect everybody around the world, and that this technology can change the entire world of financial services to be one open financial system that is open 24/7 for everyone around the world and doesn't shut down suddenly when there's a financial crisis. We were very excited and passionate about Bitcoin. We started writing about the tokenization of Bitcoin very early on. We actually built a decentralized exchange on Bitcoin with atomic swaps of tokenized assets we called colored coins back in 2012.
Then, in 2013, something happened that would later define an entire industry. The first token sale. And it didn't happen on Ethereum. The first ICO was on Bitcoin.
I wanted to do things that today we call it decentralized finance. I didn't come up with that word, but I wanted to do things like that. And it appeared to me that Bitcoin gave us everything we needed as a foundation to build something like DeFi on top of it. I remember using the example of, say somebody wants to place a bet so to speak, on the price of gold. Could we do something like that on top of Bitcoin? And so I wrote a white paper in early 2012 describing how that could potentially be done. And my initial hope was that somebody else would do it. I wasn't really looking to quit my job and, be an entrepreneur. It sounded stressful. Just put the white paper out there, hoping that someone else would be like, yeah, that looks great. People paid attention. They thought it was interesting. They talked about it, but nobody went and did it. It was about a year and a half later, I went to a Bitcoin conference and somebody invited me to be on a panel. And I tried in that panel to get people to do it, and nobody would do it. People talked about it. Same thing. People talked about it. And so it was a couple months after that I finally put it on the Bitcoin forum, hoping I was just like, hey, here's a Bitcoin address. Anybody that's interested in this, send me some Bitcoin and you'll have a part of whatever this is that I'm building, which later people called that style of fundraising an initial coin offering. So I get to be credited as the first one, somewhat born out of laziness, somewhat out of naivety, thinking that the regulators wouldn't care. I wish I had kept a lot more cryptocurrency. This is the regret of everybody who saw crypto early. I did not keep nearly enough, and what little I have to move it into ETFs because, I love the idea of self-custody, but it's just too dangerous, even though I don't have much.
We just look at the innovation that did happen on Bitcoin. We actually have somewhat of a blueprint of what would have happened. A project called Counterparty enabled users to issue assets directly on Bitcoin. In a 2014 interview, Adam Krellenstein, co-founder and chief architect of Counterparty, laid out a vision that contrasts with the digital gold framing. Krellenstein argues that Bitcoin's real breakthrough was not the currency, but its distributed consensus mechanism, a neutral global ledger that could support far more than payments. Counterparty was built as a layer on top of Bitcoin, extending the base chain with financial instruments, token issuance, derivatives, decentralized exchanges, and eventually smart contracts, without creating a new blockchain.
Bitcoin, as I said, is really those two things, that currency and the network. And the revolutionary part about Bitcoin really isn't the currency. The currency itself is remarkable. It's digital gold, and it's digital gold tied to a very modern payment mechanism. But the real revolution was the distributed consensus mechanism. That's the algorithm and the system by which a number of parties all come to consensus on the same ledger, given their differing biases, given that they may have differing incentives. They might even have competing incentives. And they all come to consensus. They're all incentivized within the system to come to consensus on the history of a ledger. And what Counterparty, the idea was to take that ledger and then add more features to it, to be able to expand it to its full potential, rather than just having a currency and a payment protocol, also having all of peer-to-peer finance, having a smart contract platform, being able to have distributed applications of all kinds, in which users around the world are able to collaborate and trade in a trustless, disintermediated fashion, rather than the way they do now, which is through middlemen, and with high barriers to entry for lots of processes.
This interview captures a moment around 2014 when Bitcoin's future still appeared open-ended, a base layer for peer-to-peer finance, programmable assets, and global coordination, before maximalism narrowed the narrative. From the Counterparty ecosystem emerged something unexpected: rare Pepes. When developers Adam Krellenstein and Ivan Wagner launched Counterparty in 2014, they originally envisioned the protocol would be used for financial applications, not culture. But once the protocol was out there, experimentation followed. By 2015, anonymous artists began minting images of Pepe the Frog, an internet meme created years earlier. They were minting them as scarce, numbered blockchain assets. At first, there were no rules, no limits on supply, no standards or shared definition of rarity. That changed in 2016 when Joe Looney, known online as the Rare Pepe Scientist, introduced a structure, a curated directory, fixed editions, and a wallet that made Pepes tradable. What emerged was a collectible market with provenance, scarcity, and culture. Rare Pepes quietly established the blueprint for NFTs, years before the rest of crypto realized what they had created. As promising as they sound, most of these experiments faded. Even experiments with use cases that trace more directly back to Satoshi's original vision for Bitcoin as peer-to-peer cash. Here's what Matt Luongo, OG Bitcoiner and founder of Bitcoin development company Thesis, had to say.
My experience has been that way back in 2013, 2014, people were interested in where can I spend my Bitcoin? Because that's how they measured, is it money? And so you'd see Overstock.com accepts Bitcoin. And so like every big bullish announcement was some new merchant accepts Bitcoin. But you know what we realized, and we kind of realized it with the space, is spending your Bitcoin is something a lot of people regret. Obviously, you know, you have Laszlo and the Bitcoin pizza story, but over my history of helping people, for example, get coffee and stuff like that at Starbucks, we had over $1 billion in today's money spent at Starbucks. People regret it when Bitcoin goes up. Obviously, the opposite happens too. They want to sell at the right time or not if you're me and you just want to hold forever. So I think one of the things that happened in that time is people went from wanting to create a day-to-day spending money to then kind of splitting off into a bunch of camps. So this all coincided with the block size war, where you saw a lot of payment use cases like ours got priced out. You saw a whole bunch of people who were building fun, weird applications on Bitcoin, and they all left. At this point, a lot of them went to Bitcoin Cash or they went to Ethereum.
In those early days, as more people experimented on Bitcoin and the network's constraints on programmability and scalability became more apparent, there was a push to increase Bitcoin's block size. That debate escalated into what was later known as Bitcoin's block size wars. Bitcoin's block size wars unfolded between 2015 and 2017 as the network hit capacity limits and fees rose sharply. One camp argued that Bitcoin should scale by increasing block size on-chain to support more transactions. That position was championed by developers like Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn. The opposing camp insisted that large blocks would centralize the network, pushing Bitcoin beyond the reach of everyday node operators. Their solution was to keep blocks smaller and optimize efficiency with upgrades like SegWit. Meanwhile, Layer 2s would also help scale the network. The conflict ended in a split. Bitcoin remained conservative, while large block advocates forked off into Bitcoin Cash. That cemented Bitcoin's identity as a decentralized, settlement-focused base layer. While many of those early projects fizzled out, the Lightning Network, one of Bitcoin's first Layer 2s, spearheading the payments use case, still thrives today. Elizabeth Stark, the CEO and co-founder of Lightning Labs, which drives development on the Lightning Network, stresses the importance of scaling Bitcoin while remaining true to its values.
We at Lightning Labs are very passionate about and working on, particularly in onboarding new developers to Lightning. But an interesting part of this is I think a lot of these new Bitcoiners, we can call them, say, pre-coiners or new coiners, they might be onboarded because of a need they have at first, right? They might need to send a cross-border payment. They might be living in an authoritarian regime with hyperinflation or capital controls. And for them, Bitcoin is meeting a real need that they have. But as they learn more about Bitcoin, they're already a part of this movement. But the future of Bitcoin is onboarding more and more people to this movement where they see the benefit that Bitcoin provides to them, because as we know, no one controls Bitcoin, although everyone also controls it. And that is radically and fundamentally different from our existing financial infrastructure today.
So why didn't Bitcoin DeFi flourish in that first era? That's because every experiment hit the same ceiling. Bitcoin was secure, but rigid. Elegant, but limited. Powerful, but hard to extend. The ideas were too early, tools were lacking, and the culture turned defensive. Back to our original question. If Bitcoin has already succeeded as digital gold, is it even worth experimenting at all? The answer is that experimentation is not a deviation from Bitcoin. It's part of its DNA. From RWA-like colored coins, to the first ever ICO, to the blueprint for NFTs, to the first ever payments layer 2. Developers have been trying to expand Bitcoin's use cases since the very beginning, not to replace what Bitcoin is, but to explore what else it could be. That experimentation never disappeared, but it did go quiet until a cultural shift reopened the door. We'll look at that Bitcoin renaissance on the next episode of Beyond Digital Gold, a Bitcoin DeFi docuseries by StarkWare and the Defiant.